I think we all have games we played when we were younger that shaped our tastes for years to come. The games we're truly nostalgic for. Far too often, the word nostalgic becomes synonymous with the word old. But really, it's a feeling to re-experience those memories we long for, to go back to try and reclaim them. Now obviously, we can't travel back in time to do it, but thankfully, we can still play the games that shaped us and reminisce about the best moments that still linger in our minds. So join me today on Push Start, where we take a personal look back at the games that shaped my childhood.
Just last night, I was lost in the jungle with Pitfall Harry, surrounded by giant scorpions and man-eating crocodiles.
This is definitely not going to be a one-and-done video, as I have so many amazing memories with all the games I played as a kid, both at home and in the arcade. It makes sense though to me to start all the way back at the beginning. I don't have a ton of memories from early on in life, but I do remember the first video game I ever played. The babysitter I was going to had kids of her own, and they had an NES hooked up to the living room television. They got to play along with the other older kids who were also being babysat, but not me just quite yet. She noticed that I wanted to play, but not wanting to force the older kids to give me a turn, she brought me upstairs where they still had an Atari 2600 hooked up. She popped in Pitfall, and I played my first ever video game. Like I said, I don't remember much from this age, but I definitely remember sitting on the edge of their bed, hanging out with Pitfall Harry, as visions of quicksand and crocodiles filled my toddler mind. Fast forward to the year 2012, and for Christmas as an adult, my father picked me up an Atari 2600 and a handful of games. Among them was Pitfall. I hadn't played this game since I was a kid, I was amped up like you couldn't believe, so of course I put that in first. And boy, let me tell you, that game sucks. It doesn't hold up at all. I was laughing the entire time playing it in disbelief that I had ever loved it and couldn't wait to play it. It just goes to show you, some things are best left in the past. I did eventually graduate to being a big kid and got to play the NES with everyone else. Every so often, we would venture to the video rental store as a group outing. We didn't have a Blockbuster in town, but instead had an incredible mom and pop shop that really shaped my taste in movies, but that's for another time. Each trip meant it was a different kid's turn to pick out a game. Me, already having been corrupted by horror movies by the age of 6, wanted to play Friday the 13th on the NES. No one else did, that's for sure. Now that I'm older, it's no wonder why. First of all, it's a single-player game, so nobody else can play with me. And to be honest, it's a pretty awful game. However, I was obsessed with the oddly neon purple Jason Voorhees who haunted this campground you were tasked with saving. I never beat the game. I highly doubt I ever got very far. But I was such a big fan of the films that I pushed past all of that defeat to spend more time with the horror icon. Don't worry though, my taste in games improved eventually, at least I think so.
There's Dad over there.
Ooh, I just love all the new things Kmart has here.
Oh, I can see that.
So that's the new Super Nintendo Entertainment System.
What about it?
They say it has 16-bit technology.
Playing games at the babysitter I was at became a tradition, as I really didn't have video games at home. I had the occasional Tiger handheld game from the drugstore, and at one point I did get a Sega Game Gear, which quickly became a mistake in my parents' eyes, as it drained batteries like you wouldn't believe. With not much to play at home, I missed out on the Genesis and Super Nintendo during their heyday. Thankfully though, I still played the hell out of the Super Nintendo, as a babysitter I eventually ended up at had one, with a very odd selection of games, many of which we'll be looking at today. Uniracers is a game so bizarre at first glance, but then it quickly blossoms into infatuation as you sink right into its pocket with the game's perfect flow of speed and tricks. It's a racing game with no drivers or riders, just self-propelled unicycles on tube-like tracks inside what appears to be the default images of a 1990s computer graphics program. While the backgrounds may be a little on the bland side, the brightly colored track and unicycles more than made up for it. Most of all, what you'll remember about the game is the sense of speed. Few racing games could match it in that department. You ride on the track, mostly right side up, but every now and then, the track switches things up, allowing you to spin around the tubes or become coated in paint, slowing you down. Most tracks had huge jumps, allowing you to trick to your heart's content. The game is so simple, and to be honest, it has next to no depth, but it's a tremendous example of a game punching above its weight. It's exactly what a great 90s game should be. Pure fun. It doesn't matter what the graphics look like, or what the soundtrack sounds like, when you keep coming back to it to bust out one more crazy flip to propel yourself to a photo finish. Interesting side note concerning Uniracers and another gaming franchise that I'm near and dear to. This was the last game DMA Design made before unleashing Grand Theft Auto onto the world. Going from the odd to the mainstream, not many games have hooked me like Donkey Kong Country. As a kid, the graphics were just unreal. The world has this amazing mix of crazy geography, from dense jungles soaked in rain to beautiful blue ice-covered caves. Each stop on your path to the final showdown with King K. Rool was a masterclass in creating memorable locales. It says a lot when you remember the levels with as much reverence as the characters, who have become some of Nintendo's biggest icons. While many will tell you that Donkey Kong Country 2 is the superior game, and if I'm pressed, I would probably agree. It's the first in the trilogy, though, that stands out the most for me. I had equal access to all 3 Donkey Kong Country games as a kid, but it's the first one I kept going back to. As an adult, I still reach for the first over the others. I loved the minecart levels. The tension of each jump is beautiful game design. Every time you land just over an empty minecart to perfectly rejoin the track still elicits a thrill. The game has so many memorable levels, from Bouncy Bonanza, where a rubber tire provides you with super high jumps, to Blackout Basement, where you're playing with the lights that go on and off, causing the whole screen to fade to black at times. Donkey Kong Country isn't just one of the games I have a strong attachment to because I played it so much as a kid. It's one of my all-time favorite games.
Let's go racing! It's Super Mario Kart Funny Car Madness! Only on Super NES! Turn the track into a giant mud pit! Or burn rubber on ice, wood, or asphalt!
Moving on to another game that launched a storied franchise, where I love the first entry in the series, and the one probably considered by most the worst entry in the series, is Super Mario Kart. I played a ton of Double Dash and Mario Kart 8, but something about the simplicity of Super Mario Kart on the Super Nintendo keeps me coming back for just one more lap. I played a lot of racing games as a kid, so you'll certainly hear me talk about more than a few in this series, but Super Mario Kart may reign supreme above all others. I can't tell you how many heart-pounding rounds of the battle mode I played. I guarded those balloons like my life depended on it. Few moments in gaming are as heartbreaking as when you pop your own balloon. It wasn't just the battle mode though. The main racing element was so much fun. The idea of your karts having weapons added a whole other dynamic most racers didn't have. The feeling of pure power when you are packing a red shell is unmatched to this day. Equal though are the pangs of disappointment when one takes you out right as the finish light is in sight. You could drift before I think most people had any idea what that meant. You had to time it just right though. If you cut those corners too hard, you would spin out and drop far behind your fellow racers. The game had a tremendous cast of characters. Obviously you have Mario, Luigi, and Peach, but I love the inclusion of Bowser. It was a nice change of pace to get the villains involved. For me though, and I honestly have no idea why, I was always drawn to picking the plain old Koopa Troopa. He's still my go-to when I play the game now. The track variety is just so much fun. Most courses had barriers, so you couldn't leave the track too much, but races on the Ghost Valley courses allowed you to fall right off the edges. I also have quite the soft spot for the Choco Island tracks, where your wheels kicked up mud like chocolate as you race through. Sure, the later entries may have offered way more variety and much more exciting courses, but the enduring charm of Super Mario Kart will always be towards the top of my list when I'm in the mood to race. Around this time period in the 90s, during the height of Sega and Nintendo's home consoles, it made sense that they would find themselves a great home for arcade ports. Putting stripped-down arcade games on home consoles certainly wasn't a new idea. Just check out examples like Pac-Man on the Atari 2600. However, with the advent of the 16-bit systems, you could get a pretty close resemblance to the arcade experience at home. One of my go-to games at the time was Final Fight. I don't think that at the time I was playing it at home, I had ever played the cabinet in arcade, but nonetheless, I was completely in love with it. I had certainly played my fair share of arcade beat-em-ups, as it was a genre I had a bit of an obsession with. I played as many as I could. I'm sure at some point during the series I'll be discussing The Simpsons or Turtles in Time, but Final Fight was just one of those games I couldn't get enough of. I was typically a Mayor Mike Hager player due to his use of pro wrestling moves, but I can't sleep on Cody. Guy wasn't in the home version, so I don't have the same attachment to him like I do the others. The home port was missing some of the features of its arcade dad, but it really didn't matter to me. I just loved suplexing people into crates and eating all the ground turkey I could find. As an adult, I do still love playing beat-em-ups, but you can get a bit jaded after understanding how many were designed just to get you to pump as many quarters into the machine as possible. Even with those flaws, there's nothing quite like a great beat-em-up, especially if you can have someone else join along. Final Fight is far from the best of the genre, but to me, it always ranked towards the top of my list.
Nothing prepares you for F-Zero, created for the new Super Nintendo Entertainment System. You won't believe the power.
Shifting gears back to racing games, for kids growing up in the 90s with access to a Super Nintendo, F-Zero was perhaps the king of racing games for most. The look of the game was unmatched. It appeared like you were zooming about in your futuristic racer inside of a computer hellscape. I don't think a single environment in the game looks habitable. The backstory of the game is actually fairly insane, though I don't think a lot of kids were paying attention to it. Here's a snippet from the game's manual, and I'll be paraphrasing here. In the latter half of the 20th century, mankind was gripped by the fear of being invaded by extraterrestrials. It is now the year 2560, and due to the human race's countless encounters with alien lifeforms, Earth's social framework has expanded to cosmic proportions. The multi-billionaires, while satisfied with their rich lifestyles, yearn for new entertainment. It seriously reads like a recruitment post for a cult. The game allows you to choose from 4 different hover cars that all zip around at hundreds of kilometers an hour. The courses typically have borders on the track that deal damage to your car if you run into them, but to offset that, there are also areas of the tracks that allow you to regenerate lost health. I think that this was the first game where I was actively paying attention to resources like this. If you get bumped around by your opponents, you also lose health, and some of the cars on the track are designed to blow up to damage you further. It's pretty tense when you're rapidly losing health, fighting for first place, and also on a track with a shortened healing area. Nothing was quite like it back then, and honestly, another racer hasn't filled the gap since. It's been quite a while since the last F-Zero game, and to be honest, I didn't get into the N64, Game Boy, or GameCube entries. The SNES version will always be my favorite, and a game I try to play at least a few times a year.
With new attacks. New super combos.
A pair of fighting games really impacted me growing up more than others. I spent a lot of time in arcades, losing repeatedly to much higher skilled players at Mortal Kombat 2, various Street Fighters, and Tekken. On console though, I was able to feel like I could hold my own against the other kids. The first of the pair I want to talk about is Street Fighter Alpha 2 on the Super Nintendo. I loved Street Fighter 2 and all of its variants, but something about Alpha 2 called out to me. The home port on the SNES should be an impossible creation, but somehow Capcom made it work. It had such a cool cast of characters that very specifically appealed to me, like Sodom and Rolento from the Final Fight series. The sprites were big and super detailed, and as a huge fan of Bison, I really dug his appearance in Alpha 2. I'm pretty sure I've never played the arcade version of Alpha 2. It'd be honestly kind of odd at this point, not having to wait for those super long loading times and dealing with the very pixelated graphics. You get used to what you had, even if what you had wasn't the best version of the game. On the flip side of Street Fighter was perhaps its most famous rival, Mortal Kombat. I played a ton in the arcades, as well as the neutered SNES port. For me though, my go-to was always Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3. It had such a huge roster of all the classic MK combatants. We used to sit around the Super Nintendo with pages printed out of special moves and fatalities for each character. These days, with recent MK entries, you can just pause the game and get a full readout of all of your character's moves and fatalities.
Wins. Round 2. Fight.
There's that certain specialness to having to research a game with the early internet and wade through all the rumors about them. How many kids on your school bus told you that they heard things you could do in the game? I've been a lifelong Mortal Kombat fan, and like a lot of fighting game players, you find the character that you main. I typically gravitated towards Scorpion. For some reason though, and I can't tell you why, I just wanted to play with everyone in Ultimate MK3. Smoke was so cool as a cyborg, Striker had the fun gun combos, and the non-ninja Sub-Zero just kinda confused me. I played the game for the first time in a while recently, and it's still just as fast and chaotic as I remember it. I think I may be too old and slow to keep up these days, but it's certainly a fun trip back in time.
Always peaceful in the Mushroom Kingdom. Till snipping the sword shatters the star road.
I figured I would save my favorite for last. I'll certainly do more of these in the future, but for now, I wanted to end on my all-time favorite game. Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars has been my favorite game since the very first time I finished it as a kid. It took me months to get through it. I had to play it at the babysitter's, which meant playing it in small chunks over a large period of time, hoping that no one deleted my save, which did happen just once, but thankfully just once. I'm fairly positive it's the first RPG I had ever played, and man, it set the bar high for the rest of my life. The new characters introduced into the world of Mario, like Geno and Mallow, have become beloved. The timing-based combat system was just so cool, and it quickly became a competition to see how many jumps Mario could hit in a fight. I love that timing-based combat system so much, it kind of ruined RPGs for me. The genre is something I can enjoy, but it's very few and far between where I actually get invested in one. A lot of the tropes found in those games kinda rub me the wrong way. However, without having played Mario RPG at a young age, I may not have ever even been open to try more in the genre. You can imagine my excitement when South Park Stick of Truth released with a timing-based fight system. It's one of the few RPGs I finished in the last 10 years or so, and probably because of that. Looking back on Mario RPG, you start to realize just how wild it actually is. Having not been made by Nintendo probably allowed developer Square the ability to take things far outside the box. From a giant talking sword to a Power Ranger ripoff to a secret Final Fantasy boss, the game is essentially a Mario-themed fever dream. To its credit for how weird it is, it's become a cherished game with fans still clamoring for a true sequel. I'm among them. I could never get into the Paper Mario games. They just weren't the same. The papercraft aesthetic is neat, but the doll-like design of Mario RPG is second to none. The characters and world all look like they could be real creations of a talented doll and diorama artist. I could go on for hours about my love and appreciation of this game, but I'll leave you with this. Everyone has a favorite game. A game that they look back upon with more fondness than any other. A game that shaped them in some way. Mario RPG is that exact game for me. When I sold my video game collection a few years ago, it was the one I kept. I don't play it often, and honestly, at one point, I had gone so long without playing it, I was worried if I would even still like the game I called my favorite. Moments after starting up a new game, all of my worry was erased. Everything still holds up today, even though I think the Axiom Rangers fight is still a little too hard. Thank you for taking this trip down my personal nostalgic game road. I'll do more of these for sure, as I haven't touched the surface of arcade games, PC games, and so much more. Leave a comment below with the game that has mattered the most to you. They may not be the best games of all time, but to us, they're just right.